next topic. This is one of the unfortunate stories, moving from interesting to depressing. Of course, I'm sure if you have read just one paper between over the weekend, you would have seen the story about deaths that occurred at Port of Spain General Hospital. I believe it's several deaths. It might be as much as 7 babies in the NICU, premature babies died. I don't think autopsies have been done. I'm not entirely sure if these were definitive statements of fact, but I believe it is suspected that a single infection potentially jumped from one baby to the next, or to put it or phrase it differently, I believe the president of the Nurses Association, Edie Stewart, might think the scenario that is potential in this situation is that it only took one patient in the NICU to be exposed or for sanitation processes or practices to be lax or to fail for whatever reason, because there's always a very, very, very small chance that even if you do everything right, something can go wrong. And it just took one failure and it then transposed to the other babies in line. The problem is we're not talking about one. If it was one, then I think the argument that, look, nothing is 100% when it comes to medical science and having to deal with infections in a hospital where you're going to have a lot of germs and viruses and bacteria. It's just one of those things, right? Because you have sick people throughout the halls. To some extent, nurses are going to, even if you're supposed to be limited to NICU, there's going to be some amount of exposure and spread in a hospital in general. You know, you have procedures to try to minimize it to be as low as realistically possible. But there's always a chance that an exception happens, because Edie Stewart said, 99%, you want to sanitize to remove 99%, because no one can guarantee 100%. This is clean of all germs and bacteria. This is completely sanitized, this is completely safe. No one can guarantee that. But when it's 7, now I have a harder time swallowing these things just happen. Now, there are some reports with regards to how the families may or may not have been treated, may or may not have been informed of the situation. In one case, one of the mothers was concerned that something was wrong with her baby, and it is reported that she was told that everything was fine until it wasn't. Although, to be fair, these things could turn quick fast. We're not talking about young people, teenagers, or early 20s individuals that are just there for routine stuff. We're talking about premature babies, some of the most vulnerable of the population. So it's not impossible for quick changes to happen. But I think we are owed an explanation, right? I believe the head of the Northwest Regional Health Authority, he has acknowledged the fact that confidence in the public health system to some extent, and in Port of Spain in general specifically, is going to take a hit. And that's just natural, because already medical science is one of those very complex things that most laymen like myself barely understand anything of anything. And to some extent, you speak to enough doctors and you realize most doctors barely understand their specialty. And there's so many facets of medical science that they're not going to understand them all, and medical cases are complicated, and they have to have room to practice medicine. And again, there are times when sometimes medical science is not going to have all the answers. But we're going to need some kind of answers, because 7 is a lot. One might be unfortunate. 2 might be an accident. 3, now we're starting to consider if it's a tragedy. 7, I think, is essentially unacceptable without a good explanation. Now, of course, as the opposition is wont to do, they are yet again calling for the resignation of the Minister of Health, Terence, which the amount of times that this minister has been called on to resign, and the thing about it is, ironically speaking, by my estimations, he's one of the few ministers that's actually doing anything. A lot of the problems in the Ministry of Health is resource allocation, aka not enough. Stop if you have not heard that before in other ministries. My main criticism of COVID had to do with border security. Other people might want to have issues with how the public health system and the parallel health systems was run. Generally speaking, I think it was done to a reasonable degree. There are worse performing ministers than Terence Yalsing. Here's the thing. To some extent, it is true. He is the minister overseeing the situation. So we do have questions. And the thing is, when something bad happens, because we're not talking about a systemic long-term issue. If it was a systemic long-term issue that then the minister was made aware of due to complaints and due to memos and internal communication and external complaints from various stakeholders, patients, etc., family members, etc. And it was a long-term thing. Well, then, yeah, he had a chance to do something about it and seemingly did not. He would have that to answer for. This is 7 babies dying in less than a week. He is not the boss of the doctors. He's not the boss of the NICU. He's the boss's 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 boss. So to some extent, his authority is more long-term. That said, now that it's happened, we need to hear from him. I'm not saying he should be fired, but he could be fired depending on how he responds to the situation. But a minister looks up in a macro level of the Ministry of Health. To some extent, we don't want ministers to be dictating to individual employees and micromanaging every little thing. That's a waste of a minister's time, and also that's a very good way to be inefficient and to make the people who's actually supposed to be doing the job disenfranchised, less effective, disgruntled, and they probably would just leave the job because it would be ridiculous. Hey, I am a doctor, a nurse, and I have the minister micromanaging me. Do we expect them to micromanage every doctor? So this is, from his perspective, it's a long-term thing that needs to be fixed. What does that mean? That means we don't want to see this happening again. But the people underneath him, and it goes down. The chief medical officer, again, he is not boss of the NICU in Port-of-Spain General. He's the boss of, I guess, the person in charge of facilities, who's the boss of the person in charge of the hospital, who's the boss of, and so on and so on and so on. And then I don't know necessarily what is the reporting relationship between the regional health authority and the head of facilities, right? Because facilities is one thing, the regional health authority. So the head of facilities, I don't even know if she is involved in that, command structure, in that chain of command there specifically. So really, the person whose seat should be on the fire should be head of the health authority, North West Regional Health Authority, and the person who's in charge of the hospital, and the person who's in charge of the NICU. Those are the three. And the person at the bottom, technically speaking, to some extent, he has the most to say. And if it's a problem because lack of resources, poor upper management decisions, setting up the field, to some extent, he needs to say this because the situation occurred where 7 babies died. And I don't think any of us is just going to accept that it was an oopsie. Now, similar situation, let's go to something a little less depressing, but still aggravating. Minister Gonzalez apologized for the criminal water racket, the criminal truck-borne water racket. And he has pointed to the fact that this thing apparently has been going on for years. So to some extent, he is technically more culpable for this than Minister Yalsing is for the situation with the 7 babies, because he's been the minister for, a couple of years now. He may not have been aware of it, but at the end of the day, he's still the minister, and rightfully so, he has apologized. And seemingly, as soon as he was made aware of the situation, he is trying to put steps in place to rectify the situation. Now, he's called out the various leaders and public officials who are also involved, like the MP, the local government officials, the public officials in WASA itself, one could argue maybe he is deflecting, but to some extent, he is correct. The people who face the blame are the people in WASA. And one would think that the local government people and the MPs and so on, well, your constituents will be speaking to you, but MPs in this country don't, where are they as MPs? They're too busy collecting a check from the one pay rise that they agreed on, bilaterally. Debating things and saying nonsense in Parliament. So many of them say so much nonsense. Now, the minister was also pointing to the fact that there was a well-oiled criminal water trucking racket operating right under the noses of various officials with no intervention. The question is, to what extent can he really clear this up? Because from what I understand, the law on this is pretty light. There is no jail time for this. There's a small fine, $750. And it's reported that one operator earned between $4,000 to $5,000 daily selling water. So, I mean, they'll pay the fine. Why not? They literally could profit just off of a day. For every instance, if you fine them for every instance, they would seemingly still potentially profit. Now, granted, apparently, Trinidad and Tobago Guardian, they did a investigative piece where they got in contact with a seller, and they basically did a sting. He was more or less caught with his hands in the cookie jar. When questioned by various individuals, first from the newspaper, then by authorities, his story changed. He was looking to sell the water for $300. If that's the going rate for a certain amount of water and you charge them $750 for each instance, of course you have to prove it, then that might, bite into their illegal profits. But it was kind of scary how, the man had like 3 or 4 different stories, and he kept changing it as more people came asking, where did you get this water? Well, I got it from Wassa. Well, I got it from a hydrant. Well, I got it from here. Well, I got it from private water. I got it from rainwater. So when he said they got it from rainwater, they told him, well, we'll charge you for selling untreated water. And he kept going until he just ran out of things that he could say. So I get it. Okay, it's good that you apologize, Minister Gonzalez. Generally speaking, I do have faith that you're one of the few ministers that actually gets things done. Not necessarily as fast as I would like, but again, sometimes there's just not enough resources being allocated for all the work that has to be done. Stop me if you haven't heard that before, or have heard that before in a different ministry. I just said it about the Ministry of Health. But I appreciate the apology, but now, of course, you're aware of the situation, so you can't claim to not being aware anymore. You've already said that you're going to try and do something about it, so let's see what you're going to do, right? Let's see what you're going to do. Hopefully for the people in that community, I think it's Mont Diablo, hopefully that has been sufficiently fixed. I don't know if it will be totally fixed, but sufficiently fixed. All right. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll get into some heavier things. Stay tuned. This is talking about WSN, the Convent Capital. We'll be right back after this.
Trinbagonians, you may know me as Blaze. Through my TV and radio shows, you've invited me into your lives. Now, the media's freedom to speak out on behalf of citizens to reveal the facts fearlessly is enshrined in our Constitution. It means we can openly demand accountability for the performance of public officers and authorities. Should your Constitution demand more too? Submit your views to constitutionalreform2024.gov.tt by the 15th of April. It's your future, it's your Constitution, and it's your voice.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, The Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Welcome back to Talk About, ladies and gentlemen. And the next story, this is one of the really interesting ones. Really interesting ones. Because, stop me if you've heard this one before. Kamala Prasad-Bissessar is unelectable. I quote my co-host from from the first time he spoke about the opposition leader. And to be fair, I couldn't fault him for it. Because, I mean, think about it, right? What evidence do we here talking about have to say that? Well, she lost the last two general elections that she participated in. That's the most pertinent evidence with regards to who should have a right to lead or not. But apparently meritocracy is a four-letter word that is strange and mysterious that we don't understand, and we cower in fear because it shall not be used, kind of like Voldemort. Meritocracy, concept that shall not be named. But okay, fine, you can lose 2 elections, but if you're still popular, that's what democracy is, right? Well, here's the thing. We here on Talking Point are equal opportunity critics. We've had issues with the government. Oh, we've had issues with the government, with the party that makes up the majority in Parliament, that is to say the PNM. We've had issues. So many issues, so many things that are startling, that are alarming. And as we come closer to the election, now we're each starting to have to think, will the people really vote them back into power? That seems like a hard sell, right? Except then you look across the aisle. And the unfortunate situation is, by my subjective opinion, the opposition is less impressive than the government. And that's saying something, because the government ain't that impressive. Now, recently, another member of the opposition has come out to say things about the current situation of the UNC. And basically what he said is that the UNC's inability to win the next election or any election stems from the continued failure of the leadership of Mrs. Kamala Prasad-Bissessar. This is coming from Shogunas West MP Dinesh Rambali. He goes on to say, curry, duck, rum, and roti are no longer the main fare at family events. Only these fanfare events have made their way into the party's modus operandi. Now, I'll say this, I'll caution him. I think I know what he's going for. It seems a bit kind of blah, blah, bacchanalic. But what I believe he was trying to say is, well, things at UNC, political events, party events, party functions, official functions, are more flash and less substance. That's my interpretation. Maybe I'm wrong. I would have wished that he phrased that better. But then he goes on to make specific, well, maybe not so specific, but specific enough allegations with regards to, one, years of experience of leadership under their belt, but they seem bent on perpetuating their own cult, seemingly under vanity, and in this process wreaking havoc among the trusting UNC party supporters, right? Only concerned about propagating its own cult of personality and in remaining in its position to enjoy its trappings. Keaton has said maybe the opposition leader just likes being opposition leader. Who wants to be in charge of this economy with all these challenges and this crime level? Or you don't have to be good. You just have to wait for the government to fail and you'll be elected anyway, right? Because you're the alternative. Either way, it works. You're in the best position. You have the best seat in the house. You just get to watch the government flounder, and either you get elected in or you get an extended vacation during the hard times. And then hopefully when you actually get re-elected in, well, the overall environment would have improved and make things easier. He calls out, MPs donate part of their salary to the party with no accountability whatsoever to how this money, I'm paraphrasing here, is being spent. We are unaware whether the party is in debt. One never knows. What is the proposed agenda of any proposed meeting? Nothing starts on time or runs on time. There are post-facto debates of bills in the Parliament caucus. As a matter of fact, very rarely do we meet before debating bills or matters affecting the party as a whole. So we are unable to properly caucus positions, which we are required to do, because, hey, you can't step out of line in parliamentary debates. We just had Opposition Senator Jayanti Lakshmi saying that we need to stick together as a team. But Mr. Ramali is saying, well, to some extent, issues come up and we don't have a proper chance to figure out what the position is supposed to be. Parliamentary debates, he goes on to say, on government policy that require in-depth analysis are often neglected with little or no coordination before debates on key bills. In more than one instance, my colleagues and I have debated bills, including the anti-gang legislation, without knowing how the party intended to vote until the time to vote. And he goes on to say, this is simply not how a party is serious about winning government to conduct its affairs. It makes sense. Why do they just throw everything, including the kitchen sink, at the wall and sees what sticks to the wall and ends up making a hole in the wall because they're throwing everything, including the kitchen sink? Because I always say, they have good points. It's just masked by all of the deluge of nonsense that they say. Well, it's because apparently they don't have a strategy. They come up with the strategy after the fact. What comes out of the rubble? That's what it is implied by these statements. And it makes sense because that's the result I see from this party time and time again. This is not something that I observed from the PNM. Let's be clear. And now, before I go with the insult to injury, there have, of course, been people who've come out against MP Rambali. And long story short, it's very interesting. He makes significant claims that I think are important. Maybe you don't, maybe they don't, maybe nobody else does except for him and me. I think it's important for the opposition to analyze complex situations and to have a clear position based on sound reasoning, as much evidence as possible, and where there is not evidence, based on fair, reasonable assumptions that is flexible enough to deal with dynamic situations as new information is brought forward, as opposed to just wigging it. He's made claims about accountability with party finances. He's made claims about punctuality, basic professionalism. People who want to be in charge of the country can't be on time. What? All of them lawyers, so they're just accustomed for things taking 10 to 15 years? The judiciary rubbing off on them a little too much? What did the counters to his claims consist of? Well, personal attacks against MP Dinesh Rambali. As far as I'm aware, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I didn't see it, but I didn't actually see any significant refutation of the points that he raised. Rather, we get, these little nuggets, right? Hold on, let me get what the opposition leader had to say. As a leader, I represent all people equally and fairly. I cannot and will not be controlled by any individual or group to promote any singular agenda at the expense of other sections of society. What is that? What does that mean? He brings up points on how the party is run. All of a sudden, it's an agenda to control her. Well, technically, he doesn't want to control you. He wants to remove you because he's basically saying you are a failure. The public grants by a few only help this oppressive government. Well, technically, yes, that's true. But it goes back to what I've been saying. If the opposition is weak, the PNM will get away with proverbial murder. And in this case, the PNM are getting away with allowing actual murder. By the way, the detection rate has dropped from 9%. It dropped from 9% to 8%. A small drop, but one would think when we're in a bad position, the last thing we want to see is trending in the wrong direction. But I said insult to injury. The insult to injury is, particularly when it comes to MP Dinesh Rambali's concerns over how the opposition conducts itself in debates in the House and the Senate debates in Parliament, when it's time to actually make contributions, he is, put up the MP's photo for me. He is, not Kamala, MP Dinesh Rambali, is one of the few people from the opposition side who consistently makes reasonable contributions, does not say foolishness. Quick example, the Brent Thomas affair, which has now come back into the limelight. When the case initially in Trinidad, I believe the judge at the time threw out all of the charges, certain aspects of the case were being appealed with regards to the criminal charges being thrown out. Certain aspects of the case was not being appealed. I believe that is with regards to his extradition and the correctness of it all. The Attorney General, our Attorney General, was looking to speak in Parliament about the situation, which is not necessarily technically the correct thing to do because part of it was still under appeal and thus sub judice. Fine. But at the same time, I want to know what's going on. So I appreciate the AG telling us something, but okay, there are things that he can't find. But then the AG decided to go on and try to speak about the part that was not under appeal. And a member of the opposition, not once, not twice, but thrice, if my memory serves correct, tried to get the AG, objected to the AG, speaking about something that was not going to be appealed by the government, therefore was no longer before the courts, by saying that it was under appeal and thus could not be spoken of. Essentially, unless the AG and myself are wrong on the technical aspects, because I am interpreting the AG's position that when you're not appealing an aspect of the case, that aspect is no longer before the court and thus no longer on sub judice. Basically, that MP was showing that he did not necessarily comprehend English at an SEA level. Because when the AG says not under appeal, and he wants to claim that it's under appeal, fortunately, MP Dinesh Rambali saved the day and continued the opposition's tactic of objecting for the sake of rejection, but with something a little bit smarter that wasn't obviously ignorant of what was being said on the floor. And that's the insult to injury. He's one of the few individuals, first of all, on either side of the aisle, whose contributions I generally respect, and I have yet to hear him say or put anything in print, anything that I have serious objections to. And there are not a lot of those people on the opposition bench. So I do wonder if this is similar to the situation with Winston Buchanan and the COP, where we're going to see someone who deserves to be in government pushed out by those who are more concerned with the pomp and circumstance, with protecting their little power base, with their popularity contests, with their benefits and their ambitions. And Mr. Rambali, he's not with the program. You know, it's not about loyalty to the country, it's about loyalty to the party. I believe he even pointed to the fact that there are party supporters who have questions, whose complaints are being unheard. Because the opposition does not have open forums. Again, you have to give it to the Prime Minister. He doesn't do it often as I would like, but at least he does it. Because I've seen more than one question at his conversation to the PM where PNM supporters or not, it puts him in a tight spot. And he had to be careful with his words, and he had to think his way out of it. Opposition leader doesn't do that. Well, okay, to some extent they were public speakers, but I don't know to what extent they were allowed to ask her direct questions on the crime talks of the opposition. It didn't seem like that forum allowed for a similar level of scrutiny. Not saying that the PNM had great scrutiny, but at least they had scrutiny. Generally speaking, I can't think of any MP outside of Dinesh Rambali whose contributions I could take seriously, and that includes the opposition leader. The opposition Senate bench is a lot better in their lineup, but I'll say no more that. I just, again, want to point out, they did not say that what he had to say was wrong. They did not say he was incorrect. They did not provide evidence to say that he was in any way misconstruing the facts, lying, misrepresenting the data, misrepresenting the situation. No. They just said things about how he is doing the wrong thing. And even some political analysts said things like, I don't think that this is going to play a factor in any upcoming general elections because dissenters come, dissenters go. That is the way of politics. But, and this is Dr. Indira Ramprasad, right? She did not agree with their approach. I would just ignore them if I were the leader. I would just ignore them. If there are real concerns, I think they should have approached the leadership. Well, based on the scenario he's outlining, it seems as though the leadership is not entertaining such dissenting opinions. Hence the need to go public. The thing about it is she herself does not necessarily say whether she believes that Mr. Rambali is right or wrong. She's just saying this is not the way to go about it. What does that mean is either it implies, I could be wrong, but are you saying, Dr. Ramprasad, that either you don't care if Mr. Rambali is correct, you don't care if what he's saying is the truth, it does not matter to you, or are you saying that it is the truth as you understand it and you're fine with it? Which one is it? That's the implication. I don't know. You tell me. Because this lack of a position, this very politically correct, but still somewhat looking biased for the incumbent position, I find is, I mean, to be fair, this is the nature of politics, right? She is kind of correct. Our immature electorate, whether PNM, UNC, that's how we respond. So she's not entirely wrong. But we have to take a break. I'll just point out the last story. You can read it for yourself. Angelique Parasol-Potter, about the Massey situation. Sounds very similar, in my opinion, to this, or similar enough, right? Basically saying that, and apparently this was to a letter, or at some point she said, Warner could not fault me on my technical competence, but shifted focus to inquire about my happiness. When I questioned the relevance, he said that he as a CEO needed an aligned team and expressed concern about my energy disrupting the alignment. I mean, that kind of sounds like a cult. Didn't MP Rambali call what's going on the cult of personality in the UNC? They don't want to hear dissenting opinions. They don't want to hear dissenting opinions if it could prevent the organization from not choosing the best option. They want alignment and good vibes and groupthink. Follow the leader like lemmings and sheep, and she will lead you to the promised land or the opposition bench. Either way, it's fine, right? It'll only be for the third time if we lose, and if we win, we are ostracizing one of the few people who actually probably could do something and not just grandstand like a used car salesman, which is what most politicians do. Let's take a break. When we come back, we have the ASP with me. We're going to continue our talks, concerns for the young people in our society. This is Document on WSN. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for. It's called loss and damage, and we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region. Man
is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions, and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. And Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada, in spite of the obvious difference in size.
Hello there and welcome to AM Prime on WESN Content Capital. Before we even start this repatriation and reintegration process, we've already failed, or are we doomed to fail?
You've got to invest in the institutions that you've established to carry out those sorts of core functions.
We now get into the regional updates to give you an understanding of what's happening across our neighboring islands.
We have available a number of films that are worth showing.
So it was day one when the French Revolution started to develop the concept of universal human rights.
What happened this time is unprecedented. It's one of the largest terrorist attacks in history.
Let's welcome Carl to the program. Carl is over there, next to Seth. Hello, Carl.
Silky anteater or pygmy anteater, and we have two of the three species of anteaters right here.
Join me, Dr. Nalini Kokaram, on What's Up Doc, where we discuss all your burning questions concerning health.
Trinidad and Tobago is among one of the highest risk group of patients that develop this form of genetic breast cancer.
What I'd like to take home from a short interview like this, screening. You must screen.
Because it's silent.
It's silent.
Yeah.
And because it's silent, you don't know it's there.
What's Up Doc every Tuesday and Thursday on WESN, Content Capital.
You are watching Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Just give an overview of what exactly is that split arrangement.
Now you don't need to register nothing. You don't need. We can do that another time. But then it becomes a hit, and then everybody starts to want to claim.
The laws that predate many of the independent countries' constitutions are going to be those colonial laws.
We know there are an infinite amount of circumstances that would lead to a murder.
I have a great idea and, I have a great concept, but until it's actually expressed, it does not become intellectual property.
Accomplishments or targets of a forensic accountant is to quantify what may have been lost.
They believe in different criminals and we manipulated the law and we exploiting the system.
A responsible journalist will reach out to the person who they have the information on for a comment.
Welcome back to Talking Point. And of course, as usual, most Mondays we have with us, schedule allowing, his schedule, not mine, the very busy ASP, acting ASP, Ashraf Ali of the TTPS, our media ambassador. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Sean.
Well, I mean, you have an important job outside of this, whereas all I have is this. So
very interesting. So that's all you have?
This is it. This is all I do. I do this, and then I do this the next day.
Very good. So, but you're doing a good job so far, right?
I watch the last two commissioners. I will take my cue from McDonald Jacobs and not give my job performance rating on myself.
I said so. I said you did.
Well, you said it in the form of a question.
Yes.
Anyway, don't answer that.
No, we wouldn't.
Right. So you're coming forth. You still have concerns, and the TTPS still has concerns with regards to young people.
Yes.
With regards to social media.
It's not social media alone. Young people on the own, on the whole, generally in the manner in which they continue to behave. There was a very disturbing report that we had to deal with early in the month, sometime last week, where 4 teenagers, and they're between the age of 12 to 14, very young children, right, that would have engaged in using ecstasy.
Teenagers,
between 12 and 14. The manner in which they would have used the ecstasy and how they got about it is a subject of investigation at this point in time. So I will not be discussing that. But the context in which we were speaking about for the last couple of days as school closed and school reopened, and over the previous vacation, is about parents and parenting and understanding how these children, the children and teenagers get involved in certain things.
Can I just get a little bit more context? Were they at a party? Were they just at a house? Were they driving out in public joyriding?
They were at a school.
They did it at school?
Yes, so that's more concerning to us.
13 and 14-year-olds did ecstasy at school, during school hours?
Yes.
Not after school?
No, during school hours. The context in which, like I said, that is mind-blowing at this point in time, and this is where it reached. And the sad thing about it is that they had to be rushed to the hospital for medical treatment.
So I have to ask, was it at lunchtime? Or was this like smack dab in the middle of the day during class? You're not sure?
I wouldn't be able to be specific as to the time.
You still have classes in the afternoon,
but the alarming situation is that these type of drugs, which is no longer alcohol and marijuana anymore in schools.
First of all, as an adult, alcohol is enough for me, right? I'm just going to say that. I honestly, and I remember seeing this, I read this in a novel, and I agree with the characters. Like, what's wrong with alcohol? Why do we need more? But they're 13. You start with alcohol, maybe you go to weed, then you go to other things. They just jump straight into ecstasy.
There was a lot of There were a lot of issues because remember there was a lot of issues when the decriminalization of marijuana came about, where people were utilizing different type of the marijuana into the food products, and then there was a particular school environment where some children got sick because they were to utilize the thing, and then now we have this issue with this other type of drugs. So holistically, we have to be very, very cautious, be very, very careful, and continue to have conversations.
I have a question though, with regards to marijuana usage, because it's not just the fact that it's ecstasy and the age, it's also the fact that it was done at school. Is there a problem of people smoking weed during school hours that you know of? Because it seems as though it's in 3 different categories that they just kind of skipped a step. If you understand what I'm trying to say, right?
Because from a reverse perspective, availability of the drugs. So yes, and the experimenting. On last week we were speaking about parenting, and this I'm not going to blame parents for this situation. I wouldn't come out wholly and say that I am going to be parenting.
Right. I mean, you don't want to just say it without knowing the facts.
Yes.
But I would have to ask, depending on how they source the ecstasy, if they got it on their own and the parents had no clue, and one would imagine their children, right, at that age, it's not like they're going to consult with their parents about who's a good drug dealer, right? But the flip side is, if it was theirs in the house and they weren't careful enough with it, maybe some culpability.
All those things will be assessed and speculated at this point in time. But it brings to the forefront.
I mean, we're assuming and we're hoping the parents didn't just give it to them, right?
The topic that we want to reinforce again, the impact of social media.
Right.
And the use of social media platforms. Now, we have a lot of persons who we have like cyberbullying and social media. So a lot of peer pressure. So long ago, peer pressure was more physically environmental in terms of the school environment. You become peer pressured from that perspective. Peer pressure is no longer face-to-face anymore. There's another dynamics where peer pressure is from a social media platform
and
now.
Could it be, you're not just limited to your school now?
No.
Because okay, for me, it would be my school, or there's another school up the road, and sometimes fights break out, and that could also have some sort of bullying. But for the most part, it's gonna be limited to that, right? In the past, now there's a potential of,
It has escalated to several different formats where we have social media. Social media is used for cyberbullying, and under the context of cyberbullying, then we also have we have persons who are engaging in other things called sex texting, that we spoke about the last time, like sharing of pics. And I don't think that teenagers and parents on the whole understand the severity and the consequence of these 2 areas. Because we feel that, okay, I give a child a phone, the child is on the phone, the child is communicating, the child is sharing pics. Even as an innocent pic, an innocent photo that could be, with all the technology that we have, that you could superimpose and place certain things. They could take your face and put you onto a body of a nude individual. So even a simple thing as sharing family photos or sharing your photo online.
Yeah, but I mean, if someone is going to go to that point, like I would argue now we're having to be too protective. Like you can't necessarily stop someone.
It's not being protective. It's about education. And I believe that we are not educating both parties sufficient enough as to the consequences of utilizing. Because really and truly, how much the amount of information that is being shared on social media that has ramifications across the board. Adults got themselves in problems by sharing nude, semi-nude. That's your personal view. That is your choice. That is your personal phone. You are free to share your personal images to anyone that you should choose to. However, what we are trying to tell the teenagers, if they are going to go down that road, there's a consequence to that action, and I think it is about time that we have we have any conversation along those lines now.
Now I want to ask: Is the ecstasy tied in social media use in any way? Is it like a peer pressure thing or a dare?
It's part of the peer.
Or was it made available online?
It is part of the peer pressure context, because you have children asked now to try marijuana cookies, marijuana products. Then you are asked, when you go to a line with other, it's no longer about take a drink. It's about take these drugs. So the peer pressure is along that line now, where the peer pressure is also about taking drugs. Are you not involved in sex? Are we waiting on this? And that is where the whole context of the whole context of last week, when we speak about the how wide social media and the pressures of a child in this current environment and all the influences, right? Sometimes I believe that there's more negative influences on a child as opposed to positive influences.
Ironically, I think sometime this weekend on YouTube, different channels will give different polls. Some of it is nonsense and jokes. Some of it is serious. I think one of them was literally about social media and children, right? And there's a part of me that feels that there's a lot of gray area. Do you just want to like totally, ban it or restrict it or censor it? But then there's another part where, based on what you're saying, and we're seeing some of the, granted, it's not the be-all and end-all. It's not like every child, every teenager between 13 and 14 last week had ecstasy.
Exactly.
But we are seeing some of the bad outcomes.
Yeah.
And they're minors. I mean, nationally, should we start to consider, hey, maybe we should put more stringent laws to manage this in place, and maybe even advise parents, maybe you should not give your children access to social media until they're adults.
Well, it's a
or have everything set on private.
And that is that's why we come back to the situation of whether or not parents, or those who are parents, those who are children, if they are being given an opportunity to be exposed to or taught what it is to be a parent in our current environment. The type of influences and the type of negative influences and the type of things that are being children are being exposed to, that you yourself growing up was never exposed to and still trying to struggle with it, right? Because that is a challenge that we face right now. So it's like we continue to say this is not only from a police perspective. We are trying to engage it because we do not want it to reach the criminal element aspect of it. Because once it reaches the criminal element, the threshold for offenses.
Do minors locally, right? I do think in the term of service, there'll be things with regards to Facebook and Instagram for minors using it. But locally, according to the law, do parents have the right to go into their child's social media? Do we even have that in law?
In our current law, I don't think there's anything that says that that debars you.
It can or cannot.
That says it can or cannot. I mean, you are also a parent, and it does not fall under domestic violence or child abuse. It's parenting. I mean, good parenting. But at the end of the day, we have to be very careful.
Yes.
In saying it does not, because if a tool or a device is used as a means of additional violence or from control, it can borderline.
Yeah, because I'm saying there's a flip side to that, where an overly controlling parent can be abusing the child, and this is where it gets tricky, because when you have to put a law into place, it has to be an objective line, and unfortunately, there are ways for bad outcomes to come either way. If you leave it open, bad things can happen. If you give parents all the control, then a different set of bad things can happen.
And that is why, from the police perspective, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, through all our soft approach programs, what we are trying to do holistically is do as much education in this area.
Well, let me stop you there, because I just thought of something ironic. Usually what happens, something happens in a school, the Ministry of Education calls on the police. Well, perhaps now we should say, hey, Ministry of Education, educate. It doesn't have to be a term-long class, but you could have workshops, right? You could bring in speakers. I remember when I was in school, they brought in Art and Action from UE to do something, I think, about communication and socialization and stuff like that. And do it frequently enough where you do it maybe like once a term, you know, or twice a term. Have homeroom teachers kind of reinforce these things, and I mean, we have to develop these things as we go along.
Well, we do, and the police service does in fact work in collaboration with the Ministry of Education. We not only provide a presence at the schools, a police presence at the school, we also have our community policing and other agencies, other units that actually go to the school and do sessions with them and educate in certain aspects of it, certain aspects. Now,
what about the NPTA? Do you all engage them? I don't know how great the body is nationally. I know school to school it could vary, but one would think, you know, this is something parents need to be.
We do have engagements with some of them, right? It has to be improved because these are things that is new, not new to the world, but new environment, new experiences that we are getting.
It's a new development of a pre-existing technology.
And once we, and that's the key. Once reports of these natures or incidents of these natures come to the attention of the police, we have to say, listen, we need to do something about it because we do not want it to escalate to another area. It is a worrying situation where children now, when we had the issue, we were to be calling for marijuana in school or smoking cigarettes in school. No, we are no, or we have to be dealt with weapons in school. No, a social drugs, a drug like this, and together with any other type of drug that causes problems.
And just to emphasize how dangerous this is, because generally speaking, cigarettes are bad for you, but a cigarette is probably not going to kill your child, so we don't have to like ring the alarm bells. Now with marijuana, nowadays you risk that something else might be within the marijuana. But with ecstasy, it's even worse because well before concerns about fentanyl being snuck into marijuana and all of that, there was a point in time I remember reading an article when I might have been a teenager about the fact that you don't always know what's made up in the ecstasy pill. And it could kill you.
And that's why we continue to ask parents, be a little more open-minded in the context of parenting and ask questions, engage with your children. Do not be afraid to ask difficult questions and quote unquote, be a parent.
What you also say part of that is, and I think this is the catch-22 because a lot of parents don't have the time that other parents of the past used to, but you need to engage with your child so when their behavior shifts.
Yes.
You know, and if you engage with your child enough, there is a chance, it's not 100% guaranteed, that you will be able to just observe. You might not see the drugs in the hand, but you might see a change.
Exactly.
And you might then have a chance to ask questions, to do something.
Yeah, so like I said on the show last week, being a parent is not just you being there in the home and you are the father figure, you are the mother figure, and that's it, right? We know society, there are a lot of challenges with single parents and all of that. That is a different conversation. Mm-hmm. But my thing about my issue here is, and what the issue that the police service is trying to address is the issue of children, that particular vulnerable group. There are a number of pressures and a number of influences that is being put on them that is very difficult for us to understand, for them at this point in time to understand whether to go on the right side or the left side, right? And the amount of pressures. So we have this situation could end up in a situation where a child become totally depressed and could end up in a critical situation where you can end up trying to hurt yourself or hurt somebody else. All of this adds to the entire scenario.
And the TTPS could only really intervene once an actual law on the books, when I say significantly intervene, when a law on the books is crossed.
From that,
you know, some minor cyberbullying probably doesn't count.
Right. So then, and that is where we continue to try to educate from our perspective. There's a lot of organization outside there, and it's as you say, there's a lot of stakeholders that need to come together and do their part in their aspect of it. That's for their responsibility, but we are trying to do our responsibility as a law enforcement agency, not only trying to prevent crime, for crime prevention, but trying to provide safety and security for our citizens. And this group, which we realize, the young group, we have to try to forge them in a proper direction. We may not get all, but this is an area that we have to look at.
All right, folks, let's just take a very quick break. When we come back, we'll open the phone lines. 13-year-olds doing ecstasy in school. I mean, it's one thing to break the law, it's another thing to kind of break the law foolishly. I'm double stunned. We take a break, we open the phone lines, and we come back after this.
The newest book is here, Closer to the Church, the debut novel by author and former mayor Louis Lee Singh. Available at all the Home Store branches, Barataria, West Mall, Shogunas and C3 San Fernando. Paper-based bookshop 10 Nook Avenue St. Anne's, WESN 30A Gattaca Street Woodbrook, Metropolitan Bookshop Ariapita Avenue Woodbrook, and all RIK bookstores nationwide. Available online as paperback on Amazon.com and Kindle for e-readers. For more info, call 628-5835 or 389-6504. Also available from author Louis Lee Singh, I Used to Live in Heaven, Letters to My Granddaughters, and Local Government in Trinidad, Conspiracy Against the People.
This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for. It's called loss and damage, and we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region. Man is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions, and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. And Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada, in spite of the obvious difference in size.
Hello there and welcome to AM Prime on WESN Content Capital. Before we even start this repatriation and reintegration process that we've already failed, or are we doomed to fail?
You've got to invest in the institutions that you've established to carry out those sorts of core functions.
We now get into the regional updates to give you an understanding of what's happening across our neighboring islands.
We have available a number of films that are worth showing.
So it was day one when the French Revolution started to develop the concept of universal human rights.
What happened this time is unprecedented. It's one of the largest terrorist attacks in history.
Let's welcome Carl to the program. Carl is over there next to himself. Hello, Carl.
Silky anteater or pygmy anteater, and we have two of the three species of anteaters right here.
Ecstasy in school, 13 to 14-year-olds. We don't necessarily want to get any more details. We want to narrow it down. You know, the identities have to be protected. To some extent, those young men were victims of their own bad choices, and thankfully, I believe they lived to hopefully learn from it. It could have been a lot worse when you're dealing with hard drugs, and 13-year-olds, folks. Okay, we open up the phone lines. We want to hear from you, the viewer. I could easily hear Mr. San Fernando say, "I told you so," because he has been championing the concerns about weed and young men, and I would not fault him for making the connection, saying, and the gateway drug leads to harder drugs.
So, but just to reinforce, it's not about men anymore or young men. It's young children.
Young children, right? 13. It's children.
And young children, male and female.
Just
male and female. So we have to be very careful.
Just finished SEA, right? That's Form 1.
Could be, yeah.
That's Form 1.
That's Form 1.
You know, 13 at Form 2 is a bit young. That's Form 1.
In the past, I think parents' issues would have been children playing all fours in school or playing cards in school. They get calling for that. You get calling for drinking some or smoking.
Your parents, liquor, yeah.
Yes, but now,
We have a Digger Martin on the line. Good morning, caller. You on the air?
Good morning. I hope you're hearing me.
Yes, I am hearing you.
Beautiful. So you all have got it fixed. A couple of issues, and I want to slightly shift, and then I'll get back to the officers' discussion.
Sure.
And I am going to speak about the Petrosin article and the Express that was written by a former PNM minister and a speechwriter for Patrick Manning. That is one of the better articles I have seen on the issue that plagued the decision for closing Petrotin. I think it is crystal clear that people in high authority basically fleece taxpayers like me to pay for an arbitration. And that is a must. That should be put into all sixth form schools for discussion to see where there is an alleged conspiracy for this whole thing to play. And we, as a citizen, if we want to see this country move forward, we cannot allow those things to happen. You have the Prime Minister saying he has done real business to save this country. And that is one of the poor decisions he has made. Okay. The other issue I want to talk with has to do with the TTPS. And I am reading another article on the newspaper on Saturday where one of the senior policemen in the Joint Select Committee basically said of the 158 murders, homicide that has been committed this year, 30, which is about 20-something% of those murders, are suspect in other homicides. That is frightening. He alluded to vigilante justice. And I am linking that vigilante justice to the performance of the police service, not doing things in an efficient, timely, and effective manner. Coupled with that, I am going to use another scenario where two ministers was on TV recently, Foreign Affairs and National Security, and they alluded to the fact that the American national security people told them that there are alleged extrajudicial killing in Trinidad, and they had to get rid of another former police commissioner. So I want to throw it right on the lap of that police, based on what I'm seeing in the public. A parallel justice system, two parallel justice systems, one vigilante justice and the other extrajudicial killings. And I want to hear from him how the police going to address that issue, so I could be confident of calling up a policeman, a police station, and saying, hey, I'm being potentially targeted. That is all I want to hear from the senior police officer with you this morning, Mr. Paul. Go and have a nice morning.
Thank you, caller. Well, I don't know to what extent you could answer that because you can't speak for the whole service. You're not that senior.
And that is the thing that we continue to push around. I'm hearing the caller. I listen to exactly what he is saying and the comments that in which that the context that he are putting it. The data that is provided by the officer in charge of the homicide is based on certain information and certain intelligence. That is the reality of it, right? But what I can tell the person, what he was speaking specifically to, as we have a caller coming on just now, is there's no guarantees that persons continue to ask for, right? You hear something, you see something, you report it to the police service. We would try our best because there are certain things that you have to do as opposed to what we have to do, right? We'll be listening to the caller and see if I can answer the other question.
I'll just say quick, repeat offenders, that's also part of the problem, comes from the judiciary and the criminal justice system on that end. And just note, with regards to police ethics, think of it more as individual officers and less of a service with regards to that aspect of it. We have San Juan on the line. Good morning, caller. You're on the air.
A very good morning to you, Sean.
Morning, morning.
And also good morning to the officer there, police officer,
morning, sir.
Ashraf Ali.
Morning, sir.
Right. Now, what I want to draw to you, both of you gentlemen, attention, something happened, I believe it was last week, Saturday. I was reading it in all three leading daily newspapers. Yeah. An incident happened on Charlotte Street, where, according to the newspaper articles, a police officer was driving his vehicle, coming down, apparently his private vehicle, coming down Charlotte Street from north to south. And he got stuck in traffic. And while stuck in traffic, a bandit approached him. And what attracted the bandit was the police officer seated behind the driver's seat, stuck in traffic. He was wearing a gold chain. And the bandit snatched the gold chain from around his neck and ran. The police officer came out of his vehicle and, using his police-issued firearm, discharged his firearm in the direction of the bandit who had just snatched his gold chain. Now, gentlemen, if you know Charlotte Street, any time of the day, maybe perhaps on Sundays, because I wouldn't go into Port of Spain on a Sunday, but Monday to Saturday, those of us who are familiar with the Charlotte Street and surroundings, Charlotte Street is a very busy area. You have a lot of people up and down both sides on Charlotte Street. People come to shop. You have a lot of vendors in the lower part of Charlotte Street. Now, I don't know, in my opinion, for a police officer who is so concerned about his gold chain that he is wearing around his neck, to discharge a firearm on a busy street, as I said, those of us who are familiar with Charlotte Street, there are a lot of people traversing both sides of Charlotte Street, up and down. Now, he discharged his firearm. One of the bullets hit the bandit, I believe in his leg or his stomach, but the other bullet, an innocent lady was walking on the pavement, and she felt a burning sensation, and that bullet hit her in her left breast. Then she realized, when she saw blood coming from her left breast, she realized she was shot. She fell down immediately on the ground, and she started to scream. And she said there were 2 holes in her left breast. Now imagine this, that bullet could have hit her in her head, and the result could have been different. Now, what I'm asking, now, I don't know if the police officer was irresponsible, that he was so concerned about retrieving his gold chain rather than the safety of innocent people going about their legitimate business. Now, the police will tell us, Sean and Officer Ali, that we as citizens must not wear expensive gold chains around our necks. We must not wear expensive wristwatches, expensive pieces of jewelry, put expensive wristbands on our hands to attract the would-be bandits. Now, here is this police officer, perhaps off duty, but he was wearing a gold chain. So it's a case like what Forbes Burnham in Guyana used to say, the former president, do as I say, but not as I do. You know, Burnham used to tell the people in Guyana, eat local fruits, potigal and mango and soursop, but he getting a special consignment of apples and grapes. So this is a clear example of the police saying, do as I say, not as I do. Because this police officer had on his gold chain. So he would have attracted the bandit who snatched his gold chain. Now, what I'm driving at is, was that police officer? I have not heard any inquiry. I have not heard the Commissioner of Police. I'm finishing now. Earlier here with Christopher, I have not read it. Launch an investigation. I don't know if Senior Superintendent Ashraf Ali, as one of the faces of the police force for the media, if an investigation was launched into the behavior of that police officer, because in my humble opinion as a civilian, I think that was an act of irresponsible for the police officer, only interested in retrieving his gold chain, discharging his weapon on a busy street. I mean, we police officer, the police officer they have to be held to a higher standard. You cannot risk discharging a firearm and endangering innocent people's lives going about their business. That is all for now. I'll listen to your response off air.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
I'll just say this first. Based on the reports from one understand, he chased after the bandit. He didn't open fire after the bandit for no reason. Apparently the bandit turned to face him with the knife. I have a knife. Now when a police officer is basically having to face someone with a knife that's willing to use it, then he in a judgment call situation. But generally speaking, I'll just say this. Technically speaking, if it was anybody else's gold chain and a police officer was there, we would want him to chase after the bandit, right? Now, a confrontation happened afterwards, so I don't know exactly what the procedures say should be done and how it should be handled, but I would just like to point out that I'm pretty sure everybody, if it was their gold chain, or even if it wasn't their gold chain, if it was somebody else's gold chain and they saw a police officer there, they'd be like, chase after the bandit, right? And I'll let the ASP now take it from there.
So I heard a lot from the caller, a lot of misinformation that the caller has. I don't know where you get information from, but it was not a police-issued firearm. So to make it absolutely clear.
Right, it was a private?
The person had his personal weapon.
Right.
The person did not get shot in the manner that he explained, right? Yes, the person was injured, not to that extent. Nevertheless, an investigation has been launched, and there will be an investigation into the incident.
That's standard, right?
That's a standard procedure.
Yeah,
right?
Gunshots happen.
Whether or not it's a police officer or not.
Official gun or not.
Official or otherwise. There is an investigation that launched because the weapon was discharged. Now, I heard he say that the police saying one thing and we're doing something contrary. And individuals in their capacity, in a private capacity, going down the streets, and you get robbed because that's what it was. It was a robbery, right? I can't say how big the chain was, whether or not you are indicating that it was exposed and you made himself a target. All of that is speculation. But we have persons, is just to show that anyone could be a victim of a crime at this point in time.
Mm-hmm.
And the messages that we continue to share is not only for the general, for the public or the civilian public, as we say, right? It's the general public. So even police officers and their families have to take precaution at the same time, because when you're not in uniform, the criminal does not know that you are a police or otherwise. Several incidents that took place already where officers were climbing or going to do their own business on their own business, and they were a victim of crimes.
Yeah.
Right? Some persons would have had the opportunity to respond, and they did respond. Right? The response, I am saying, is based on what the caller is indicating. I am not going to speculate on the response. Right? The investigation will determine whether or not it was satisfactory or not.
A reasonable use
whether
of force.
reasonable or not, right? But this is something that we have to look at. Holistically, when you ask a police officer or a police officer is involved in an incident, is idea you responded to respond. And the same conversation that you just mentioned there, the same point that you were making, if it was not the officer's, was not the victim, and he was there, is he or she not required to respond?
Yeah.
And they may have had to respond and discharge their weapon at that point in time. So it is a situation that is real.
I would just say, caller, technically speaking, the ASP is not disagreeing with your point. He is agreeing with you in the sense that police officers should also listen to this advice, right? With regards to of being careful with your possessions and not making yourself obvious targets, with regards to the shoot, he is correct. I will say this, in theory, a police officer should have training. Anybody with a gun, whether it's a civilian or police officer, should have enough training. Yes, it's a high tense situation, which is why we probably need more training than we get civilian and police and otherwise, right? Discharging a firearm in a crowded place is always very risky. But again, to be fair to as what Ashraf is saying, his background might have not included anybody. And someone who's walking none the wiser might have just, as he decided to pull the trigger, unfortunately, it's not a satisfactory answer. But I know enough to know that these situations are far more complex and fluid and not always clear-cut.
Exactly.
So we don't want to pass judgment. But in general, yes, it is a situation that has a lot of risk. But like I said, that's why, what did I lead off with? And you pointed it out, right? If it was somebody else's chain and an officer was there with a uniform off duty and people knew he was an officer, they would have wanted him to do something.
Yeah.
Right? And now it's up to the investigators to kind of figure it out. And, of course, how long investigations take and whatever, that's a whole separate topic.
Yes.
But
so just in topping out, closing off on our conversation with respect to the main topic, I just want to ask parents outside there, be very cautious. Take some time to know your children, what they are doing in and out of the house environment. Know their friends. Get involved in their lives in the context of being able to share positive influence on them. And because there's a lot of negativity taking place in and around the lives of children, a lot of pressures that are on them, and they may make bad decisions, very bad decisions in some situations, and the consequences could be, it may not be life-threatening, but it can damage them in their character and their career going, and in their personal and social life going forward, especially when it comes to social media.
Yeah, because how will future employers look at you? You did drugs at 13.
So not even drugs, but even posting pics online, very controversial type pictures online that
might get leaked.
We are in an environment with social media, and just to think that when you go to get an interview now, they ask about your social media platforms and where you are, because they're doing background check on your social media to see how you are behaving on social media, because they want to know that you are positive influence or you, within your moral and ethical standards towards their company. So that is not only your resume. Your resume is one aspect of it now. It's just one aspect. Now they're looking at your social media background. So anything negative or that can harm your social media background or is harmful in your social media background can also influence on your proposed applications for a job in the future. It doesn't matter how old it is anymore, right? Once it's there, as we say, you can't pull it back. So it is a trying situation when it comes to social media for us right now.
And folks, if you think, oh, it's not so hard, why are people making such poor decisions when it comes to things like this? Need I remind you that we are facing an election where we're basically, once again, probably going to have to base our vote on who is the least bad, not who is the best for us to move forward, right? I believe it was a certain Minister of Finance who's currently the Minister of Finance. He is famously quoted, maybe it's a misappropriated quote, quoted as saying, well, we are perceived as being less corrupt. And to some extent, there's the implication of, oh, to some extent, both sides are corrupt. Now, to what extent, we don't necessarily know, right? We might never know. We might never know all of the things that good, bad happens in the annals of government. But for the most part, we could see their performance on a daily basis with every session of parliament, with every public speaking opportunity, with every article in the newspaper. And what do we have to show for it? And at the end of the day, it's not their fault, you know. To some extent, it is. But a lot of it is on us. So we made decisions that led us here. And that's just an example to show you how, no matter how smart we think we are, no matter how superior and smug we think we are, look at where we've reached, where our politics is just bad and worse. Who are we going to vote for? We need to approach things with a little bit more care and concern. And I think that the fact it's telling our concerns about parenting, our concerns about community, our concerns about being our brother's keeper, not just our family's keeper, not just our neighbor's keeper, but our fellow countrymen's keeper. I think it goes hand in hand with how we deal with our politics. And a bad outcome in one might actually be a symptom of something greater, and it's exposed in a bad outcome in the other. All right, despite all the pessimism, we still believe in TNT. We still live here. We still hope to see it do well. We still hope for everybody to prosper and live well. But in order to do that, we need all to do as much as we can. Make today a good day, as my co-host always says. We will see you tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.
WESN.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
My name is Kama Mirage. As a lifelong entrepreneur, I often share the benefit of my experience with our young innovators and small businesses. Just as I strive to guide others, our Constitution must also foster an environment for citizens to thrive. This begins with education catering to diverse learning styles and extends to establishing frameworks that support new enterprise. But are we doing enough? Constitutional reform needs your input by 15 April at constitutionalreform2024.gov.tt. It's your future, your constitution, your voice.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378, or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
The newest book is here, Closer to the Church, the debut novel by author and former mayor Louis Lee Singh. Available at all the home store branches, Barataria, West Mall, Shogunas and C3 San Fernando. Paper-based bookshop 10 Nook Avenue St. Anne's, WESN 30A Gattaca Street Woodbrook, Metropolitan Bookshop Ariapita Avenue Woodbrook, and all RIK bookstores nationwide. Available online as paperback on Amazon.com and Kindle for e-readers. For more info, call 628-5835 or 389-6504. Also available from author Louis Lee Singh, I Used to Live in Heaven, Letters to My Granddaughters, and Local Government in Trinidad, Conspiracy Against the People.
We are WESN, the premier platform for Caribbean content. WESN, covering West, East, South, and North. WESN, we entertainment, sports, and news. WESN, available on Greendot 7, Amplia 118, Airlink 17, Bmobile 107, Digicel 21, ICNTT 105, and Flow 110. Connect with us at WESNCC or stream online at www.wesncc.com. WESN, your premier platform for Caribbean content.
safely returning, despite the airstrikes. Today marks a year of war in Sudan. The conflict between the army and the paramilitary group, the RSF, has killed thousands of people and displaced over 8 million, both inside Sudan and across its borders. Now today, the United Nations says it urgently needs more money to get food and medicine into Sudan, and that's why France is currently hosting a funding conference attended by donor nations and by Sudanese civil society groups. With a snapshot look at the war 1 year on, here's France 24's Karis Garland.
On April 15, 2023, thick smoke rises over Khartoum after months of heightened tensions between the leaders of the country's two rival military factions. The paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, led by General Mohammed Hamdan Daglo, launched a series of attacks against General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan's army. 1 year later, there's no end to the fighting in sight. On Sunday, former Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok called for the two sides to return to negotiations.
Our call is to stop the war, address the humanitarian situation, stop targeting civilians, restore the path of democratic transformation, and open an expanded dialogue that leads to the formation of peaceful transition structures.
The Rapid Support Forces and allied militias currently hold the upper hand on multiple fronts. Evolving from the Janjaweed militias, which contributed to the genocide in the Darfur region in 2003, they now control a large part of the region in the west, several provinces in the east and center, as well as parts of the capital. The Sudanese army, meanwhile, retains part of the territory between the River Nile and the Red Sea. Last January, for the first time since the start of the conflict, the army went back on the offensive, making inroads into Omdurman, Sudan's second most populous city. Both sides are accused of war crimes, and civilians are paying a heavy price for the conflict. There's no official death toll, but some estimates put the figure at 15,000. According to the UN, half of Sudan's population, about 25 million people, are in need of humanitarian aid.
And we'll have more in the next hour on that funding conference for Sudan. But first, up next, it's France in Focus. And today, Aurore Dupuis takes us inside the Notre Dame, 5 years after the catastrophic fire.
Notre Dame, engulfed in flames. 5 years ago, the world watched in horror Paris's landmark burn. Today, the spire has been rebuilt exactly as it was. Carpenters and artisans are hammering away to meet the deadline. The cathedral is due to reopen in 8 months, and life has resumed in the historical heart of the capital. Claude and his wife, Denise, spend their whole lives on the Île de la Cité, an island in the River Seine, home to Notre Dame.
I grew up going to Mass at Notre Dame. That's where I went to Sunday school. My first communion was there. So it's part of us.
From the couple's balcony, the back of the cathedral graces their view. On the 15th of April 2019, they witnessed the blaze, helpless.
It was a catastrophe. Over there, on the Pont d'Arcole, about 100 people gathered. They screamed when the spire fell. And minutes later, religious chants rose. My husband and I had tears in our eyes.
It's very moving. We think about it a lot. In fact, it took me a very long time to be able to look at these photos because it sparked too strong an emotion for me. These are the most impressive photos, because the spire was still there.
That's right, it was right before it fell.
Despite calls for evacuation, the retirees refused to leave their home.
On that day, the wind miraculously blew from the east. If it hadn't blown from the east, our building, with its wooden frames, would have burned down. We were saved by the wind.
Over the past 5 years, residents around Notre Dame have lived amidst the ongoing construction. The building site has changed their daily lives. Michel Mathieu has run this souvenir shop for half a century.
We've noticed there are less tourists than before. My turnover has dropped by around 60% compared to 2018. It's not only a disaster for the cathedral, but also for the